Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. I've kind of danced around the issue for a bit, but now I actually want to talk a bit more about the Black Loyalists in general, and also about one of them in particular, who absolutely should be recognized far more in Canadian history. The one I want to talk about specifically is a man named David George. And if Reverend Ed Trevors is watching this video at any point, I absolutely would love to talk to him about this Black Nova Scotian man from Shelburne, Nova Scotia, where Reverend, Trevors is currently located, and really just talk about this man, what he said and did, and what happened to him in the Black community and Christianity. I would love to pick his brain on this because, spoiler alert, David George is kind of like a historic Martin Luther King figure for the Black community in Nova Scotia. But with that, let's talk about where he comes from and the Black Loyalists. So, freedom and a farm. This was the slogan and the promise made by the British Empire to any Black slaves who were owned by rebellious Americans. Now, it was also made to any who were seeking just freedom in general during the war and rose up in support of the British Empire. That was also how it applied. But this is how we get to, several thousand free Black people in the wake of the American Revolution moving to Canada, specifically Eastern Canada, what we know as the Maritimes. Now, in total, there was anywhere from 40,000 to 50,000 loyalists from the United States who fled to what was known as British North America. These are the colonies of Nova Scotia, Lower Canada, and Upper Canada, respectively. Now, at this point, Nova Scotia is a colony that includes present-day Nova Scotia, but also New Brunswick. And the reason why New Brunswick exists as a province is because all these loyalists showing up kind of overwhelmed the administrative structure, and so they cut the colony in half, and the western half became New Brunswick. So because of the American Revolutionary War and the arrival of loyalists and the arrival of Black people is the reason why New Brunswick exists as a province. Well, as it existed as a colony, it exists as a province because it eventually decided this Canada idea sounds nice. And so that's where the story begins. And because of this massive influx caused a lot of scarcity and hardship for a lot of people, but especially it was acutely felt by the Black loyalists fleeing America. In fact, Nova Scotia was known as Nova Scarcity by many people during this point of time. And unfortunately, of those, 3,500 and so African Americans who arrived in Nova Scotia, nearly half of that number went to Shelburne, Nova Scotia, because of promises of land and freedom. Now, not only was that, free land and freedom, but they, had honestly thought that, hey, you know what, we're free now, so that's one part of the agreement kept. What about the other? Which, well, that didn't really happen. So the Black Nova Scotians in Shelburne were given less than ideal plots of land. And so what they did was they formed their own settlement called Birchtown, which was across the harbor from Shelburne. Because of this and the hardships they faced, many of them really turned to faith and spirituality to, keep them going through these hard times. This is where David George comes in. David George was, as an American, he was ultimately converted to the Baptist faith. And his emotional sermons drew in not just Black settlers, but white settlers as well. They were entranced by how he spoke and what he spoke of. Additionally, as his following grew and grew, he became the most famous pastor at the time in all of Nova Scotia. A free black man from America speaking about the plight of the black man in Nova Scotia and speaking to the hardships of the reality of life at this point in time, not just for black people, but for other settlers. He was enthralling, spoke of liberty and justice, and spoke not of, differences between races, but how we are all God's children. He gave black people in Nova Scotia and, in New Brunswick as well at this point, he gave them strength. He gave them courage. And he even baptized white loyalists. He was so effective at this that he got white people to get over, some white people, to get over their racism and let his hand touch them and baptize them in new faith. This, of course, didn't sit well with a lot of other white people, and especially with colonial administrators who relied on the rigid racial hierarchy. Because of this, he raised the ire of local racists, and then this eventually turned to violence. And I mentioned this in one of my videos in that series on the unfortunately dark history of Canada. But it was the earliest recorded race riot anywhere in North America, and it was in Shelburne, Nova Scotia. On the 26th of July, 1784, a group of white people demolished George's home, and they also demolished those of 20 other free black people in the community. They used clubs and hooks to attack and maim various black locals just across the harbor from Shelburne in Birchtown. These riots and confrontations lasted 10 days. And after that, it would be known as the Shelburne Race Riots. And it's a stain that remains with Shelburne and Nova Scotia and Canada to this day. Or at least it should. Lots of people don't know about this, whether they're local to the Maritimes or not. And I wish more people knew about David George, the man who in many ways was an early spiritual and civil rights leader. In the 1700s, for God's sake. And he was punished for it. And black settlers, while trying to make a go of their own, modest existence, were punished for having the audacity to succeed. These stories should be taught, not only to celebrate people like David George, but to also fill us with shame and regret for punishing that so early on and adding to the complexity of our history. And the fact that people don't know about him and about the Black Loyalists and about the Shelburne Race Riots is definitely what's bothering me today.